In a dusty attic, a young man named Daniel discovers a watch that stopped ticking long ago, its hands frozen at 2:17. Yet somehow its silence still speaks of love, loss, and memories carried across generations. Dear friends, I invite you to join me for this story. So pour yourself a cup of tea, settle into your favorite chair, and let's begin. The afternoon sun slanted through the small attic window, casting long shadows across cardboard boxes and forgotten treasures. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow as he sorted through his grandmother's belongings, each item a doorway to memories he'd never known existed. She had passed 3 months ago peacefully, in her sleep, as the nurses had gently told him. At 87, Grandma Rose had lived what everyone called a full life, though Daniel was beginning to understand that no life ever feels quite full enough when it ends. He opened an old cigar box, the kind his grandfather might have kept on his nightstand years before Daniel was born. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a wristwatch, not the digital kind that beeped and flashed, but an old-fashioned timepiece with Roman numerals and hands that had stopped moving long ago. Daniel lifted it carefully. The metal felt warm in his palm, as if it had been waiting for him. The hands pointed to 2:17, whether morning or afternoon. He couldn't tell, but something about that frozen moment felt significant, like a secret whispered across decades. The watch face was scratched, but not broken. The leather band had darkened with age and wear, molded into the shape of a wrist. Daniel had never had the chance to hold. His grandfather, Thomas, had died when Daniel was just 3 too young to remember his laugh, his stories, or the weight of his weathered hands. Daniel turned the watch over and found an inscription etched in elegant script. For Thomas, my brave heart, forever yours, Rose. 1943. 1943, Daniel whispered to the dusty air. That was during the war, World War II. His grandfather had been a soldier, though the family rarely spoke about those years. Like many men of his generation, Thomas had kept his war stories locked away, carrying them silently until they followed him to the grave. Daniel held the watch to his ear, hoping to hear the familiar tick-tick-tick that might bring it back to life. But there was only silence, the kind of deep, respectful quiet that fills old churches and childhood bedrooms after everyone has gone to sleep. Yet somehow that silence felt alive. That evening, Daniel sat in his grandmother's kitchen, still fragrant with the memory of cinnamon rolls and Sunday roasts. He placed the watch on the worn wooden table, where 3 generations of his family had shared meals, homework, and the small moments that become precious only after they're gone. His Aunt Margaret, Rose's eldest daughter, arrived with a casserole dish and the particular efficiency of women who've spent decades caring for others. "Oh my," she said when she noticed the watch. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture Daniel recognized from his grandmother. "I haven't seen that in years." "Tell me about it," Daniel said, pouring coffee from the percolator that Rose had refused to replace. Despite 50 years of gentle suggestions, "Tell me about Grandpa Thomas." Margaret settled into her mother's chair, with the careful movement of someone whose knees remember every dance. Every child chased through backyards, every floor scrubbed on hands and knees. Your grandfather was 19 when he left for Europe. She began, her voice carrying the rhythm of a story told before, though perhaps never to him. Mama was 18, and they'd been married. Exactly 4 months when his unit shipped out. She reached for the watch, cradling it like something fragile and holy. He wrote to her every week, sometimes twice a week when the mail was running. But there was one letter, dated November 15th, 1943, that took 3 months to reach her. When it finally arrived, all it said was, "The watch stopped today at 2:17. I'm still here. I love you. Thomas." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "What happened?" "A mortar shell," Margaret said simply. His unit was moving through a French village when it hit about 20 feet from where he was standing. The explosion threw him against a stone wall. When he came to, his ears were ringing. His uniform was torn, and his watch, the one Mama had given him before he left, had stopped. She paused, smoothing her fingers over the cracked leather band. But he wasn't hurt. Not seriously. A few cuts, some bruising. The medic said it was a miracle. Your grandfather, though he took it as a sign, he said God had stopped time for just long enough to keep him alive. And that watch was proof. Daniel understood now why the silence felt so full. This wasn't just broken machinery. It was a monument to a moment when everything could have ended, but didn't. "Did he ever try to fix it?" Daniel asked. Margaret smiled, and for a moment, Daniel could see his grandmother in her face. "Oh, dozens of times. After the war, he took it to every jeweler in town. They all said the same thing: the mechanism was too damaged, the parts too old. But your grandfather never cared about having it tick again. He used to say, 'It already told me the most important time of my life. What more do I need to know?'" Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself returning to the watch again and again. He kept it on his nightstand, where he could see it first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, he imagined he could hear it, ticking not with the mechanical precision of modern timepieces, but with the steady, patient rhythm of a heart that had learned to appreciate borrowed time. He began asking questions, calling distant relatives, visiting the local historical society, searching through boxes of letters and photographs that painted a picture of a man he'd never really known. Thomas had been born on a farm outside town, the youngest of 6 children during the hard years of the Depression. He'd learned to repair things out of necessity: watches, radios, anything with gears or wires that could extend its usefulness a little longer. When he'd married Rose in the summer of 1943, he was working at the local manufacturing plant during the week and helping his father with the harvest on weekends. Daniel found a photograph of his grandfather in uniform, standing next to a military truck with 3 other young men. They all looked impossibly young boys, really dressed up in adult responsibilities. Thomas was smiling, but his eyes held something deeper than happiness. They held the particular awareness that comes to people who understand that tomorrow is never promised. He fastened that watch every morning before going on patrol, Margaret had told him during one of their coffee conversations. Mama said he wrote about it in his letters, how the weight of it on his wrist reminded him that he had something to come home to. Daniel began to understand that the watch wasn't just a timepiece, it was a talisman, a prayer worn on the wrist, a daily promise between a young soldier and the woman who loved him. He imagined his grandfather's hands, probably shaking with cold or fear or both, fumbling with the watch band in the pre-dawn darkness of a military camp. He thought about Thomas checking the time before missions, watching the minutes tick by during the long, quiet hours when soldiers think about home and wonder if they'll live to see another sunset. And then came November 15th, 1943, 2:17 in the afternoon, French time. Daniel pictured the explosion, not the Hollywood version, with dramatic music and slow motion, but the terrible, sudden reality of war. The confusion, the ringing ears, the taste of dust and fear. And somehow in all that chaos, the strange mercy of a watch that stopped at exactly the right moment to mark a life preserved. One evening in late autumn, as Daniel sat in his grandmother's kitchen, grading papers from his high school history class, he realized something profound. The watch had been teaching him about time all along, but not in the way he'd expected. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, studying the Roman numerals that marked hours his grandfather had lived through and hours he'd been given as a gift. The hands still pointed to 2:17, frozen in their eternal moment. But Daniel began to see them differently. This wasn't broken time, it was perfect time. The moment when everything could have ended, but didn't. The second, when love proved stronger than war, when hope outlasted fear, when a young man's future was handed back to him like an unexpected gift. Daniel thought about all the time that had flowed from that preserved moment. His grandfather had come home in 1945, had held his wife in his arms, had learned to farm and to father. He'd raised 3 daughters, had taught Daniel's mother how to ride a bicycle and how to change a tire. He'd built the front porch, where Rose had shelled peas every summer until arthritis made such small tasks impossible. All of that life, all of those ordinary, precious moments had been made possible by 2:17 on a November afternoon in 1943. The watch wasn't silent after all, Daniel realized. It was keeping perfect time, the time of memory, the time of love passed down through generations, the time that connects us to those who came before and those who will come after. He began to hear its true rhythm, then not the mechanical tick, tick, tick of springs and gears, but the deeper pulse of stories told around dinner tables, of photographs preserved in albums, of wisdom whispered from grandparent to grandchild. It beat in the cadence of his grandmother's voice as she described her young husband's letters. It echoed in his aunt's laughter when she remembered Thomas teaching her to whistle. It resonated in the way his mother's eyes grew soft whenever someone mentioned her father's gentleness with children. The watch was ticking, had always been ticking in the rhythm of a family's heartbeat across time. On the first anniversary of his grandmother's death, Daniel made a decision. He fastened the watch around his own wrist, feeling the worn leather settle against his skin like a benediction. It looked different on him than it had lying in the cigar box or sitting on his nightstand. Against his wrist, it seemed to come alive not mechanically, but purposefully. He understood now that this was how it was meant to be worn, not as a timekeeper, but as a keeper of time itself, the important time, the time that matters. That evening, he called his teenage nephew Jake, who was struggling through his senior year and worried about college, about the future, about all the uncertainties that young people face when they realize that childhood is ending, but adulthood feels impossibly complicated. "Uncle Daniel," Jake had said during their conversation, "I just feel like I'm running out of time, like I should have it all figured out by now." Daniel looked down at the watch on his wrist, its hands still pointing to 2:17, still marking that moment when time had stopped just long enough to save a life. "Jake," he said gently, "let me tell you about your great-great-grandfather and a watch that taught me something important about time." As Daniel told the story, his grandfather's courage, his grandmother's faith, the moment when everything stopped and started again, he realized he was doing more than sharing family history. He was passing on the watch's true gift, the understanding that we all have more time than we think, that every moment is borrowed and precious, that the tick-tick-tick of our lives isn't measured in seconds, but in the love we give and the memories we create. The best kind of time, Daniel concluded, isn't the kind you can measure with a watch. It's the kind that lives in stories, in the lessons our grandparents teach us, in the moment when you realize that everything you need to know about courage and love is already written in your family's history. When he hung up the phone, Daniel carefully removed the watch and placed it back in its velvet-lined box. But he didn't close the lid immediately. Instead, he whispered the words his grandmother might have said, the words his grandfather would have understood. "It doesn't need to tick. It already tells the time that matters." My dear friends, as we come to the end of Daniel's story, I hope you'll take a moment to think about the timepieces in your own lives, not the clocks on your walls or the watches on your wrists, but the deeper rhythms that keep time in your hearts. Perhaps it's the memory of a grandparent's voice, still offering guidance years after they've gone. Maybe it's the laughter of children that echoes through decades, or the steady tick of love that has marked the rhythm of a long marriage. These are the timepieces that never break, never need winding, never lose their accuracy. In a world that often feels hurried and harsh, remember that the most important time isn't rushing past us. It's living within us in every story we remember, every lesson we pass on, every moment we choose to love despite uncertainty. Like Thomas's watch, our hearts may sometimes feel like they've stopped ticking, but if we listen carefully, we'll hear the deeper rhythm that connects us, all the timeless beat of human love, resilience, and hope. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until we meet again, may you always remember that the best stories, like the best timepieces, don't just mark time, they make it meaningful.